Everyone, this is Mr. Sia, and in this lesson you are going to learn the conditions for a parallelogram to be either a rhombus, a rectangle, or a square. Okay, so let me go over the properties here. So property number one, if the diagonals of the parallelogram are perpendicular, okay, that's one. So if you see, as you can see in this diagram, when the diagonals intersect, they form a right angle at the intersection. So if you see this, so that's one condition. Or, so you can see this one, or if a diagonal of the parallelogram bisects. Don't forget, bisect means to cut in half. So bisects a pair of opposite angles. As you can see, this angle and this angle are equal, and this angle and this one are equal because they're being bisected by this diagonal. Okay, so if you have either this property, the diagonals are perpendicular, or that one diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. And therefore it has four congruent sides. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So property number two, if the diagonals, okay, of the parallelogram are congruent, okay, so as you can see in this diagram, so if diagonal WY is congruent to diagonal ZX, okay, then the parallelogram is a rectangle. Okay, so the parallelogram is a rectangle, and therefore it has four congruent angles. Don't forget, this is the symbol for angles. Okay, so it has four congruent angles. Number three, if number one and number two, meaning these two properties, are true, then it is a square. So the square has the properties of a rhombus and a rectangle. Okay, so we're going to use that on the following three examples. So in these exercises, classify each of the following and explain how you know. All right, so first of all, I'm given that MO is congruent to PN. So MO congruent to PN, which means the diagonals are congruent. So when you see this, then look at which one you can apply. So as you can see on this one, we can apply property number two because the diagonals are congruent, which means this figure has to be a rectangle. And I can explain my conclusion here because diagonals, okay, so this is me explaining diagonals. I'm sorry, can you see that? Okay, diagonals are congruent. So that's how we know this is a rectangle, because diagonals are congruent. So that makes it a rectangle, which means it's property number two. So let's go on to the next example. Example number two. By looking at this diagram, I see that this diagonal here, TV, bisects this angle and this angle, so it's bisecting opposite angles. If that's the case, then we're looking at number one, so that makes this figure a rhombus. Okay, so my answer to this one is I'm going to classify this one as a rhombus because of property number one. I mean, one of the conditions of property number one. So this one is a rhombus because diagonals bisect opposite angles. Okay, all right, let's move on to the third example. So on example number three, we're given that AC is congruent to BD. Okay, so these two diagonals are congruent. So far we know that this one is a rectangle. that's given to us, but something else we need to see on the diagram is that when the diagonals intersect, they form a right angle, which means the diagonals are perpendicular. So we have diagonals congruent and we have diagonals perpendicular. So we have, for a rectangle, diagonals are congruent, so that makes it a rectangle, and diagonals are perpendicular, so that makes it a rhombus. So property number 3 says that if properties 1 and 2 are true, then it is a square. So this one is a square. Okay, so that's my answer for this one. And then I'm going to explain by saying diagonals congruent and also diagonals perpendicular. Now I'll just use that symbol for perpendicular. Okay, so let me just go back here real quick and add a note. So here I'll just say AC perpendicular to DB. And don't forget, this is the symbol for perpendicular. That means the upside down T means perpendicular. So I hope that helps you with this assignment, okay? And do let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. All right, bye-bye.